Scott, you're a farmer. That's how you started this journey, right?
Yeah.
And whereabouts are you from, Scott?
I'm originally from out near a small town called North Star, near Gundawindi. That's where I originally come from.
I have a farm in Coolatai.
Yeah, right. So you're very, very close.
And I'm at Wallingra.
So, yes, opposing football teams or something like that, yes. I would have been watching. And where the Yowies come from. Lots of Yowies there. So that's my background. I'm a fifth generation farmer. I've seen all of the problems in the landscape and the type of social hell that's been enacted on the families there through the last sort of, 20 years or 40 years that I've seen it. I'm the generation that left the land to go and look for better prospects. And I got through, and through leaving the land, I went through the city, jobs, trades, studied art, became an artist, did all sorts of things. And then what I did is I've traveled the world, and then I got back to my starting point, and I thought, I don't see regeneration here. I'm going back to the land now. I'm going back to country. I'm going to work with country because that's where I see the antithesis to destruction can be enacted and played out. So that's where I am now. So I did learn this journey. I went through a very long period of permaculture-based systems, applying them to broad scale or trying to work into a broad scale level of production where there is enough efficiency in the process that we can feed community. And that was a very long journey, very, very, very difficult, but very rewarding. I went into agroforestry. That was where it led me, was into agroforestry, perennial systems. And through that agroforestry, I was working sort of on an analog type agroforestry type approach. And then the word came out about 6 years ago of what Ernst was doing. I saw what Ernst was doing, and I immediately knew that was the answer for me and my goals. And then so I've known Victor Pires for a long time, and he went to Brazil and did a course and came back. We started to play around with it at where I was in Wollumbar, and in 2016, 2015, I think it was. And then Victor teamed up with myself and Tiago Barbosa, and then brought over two teachers, Namaste Messerschmidt and Patricia Vaz, and that changed everything. Once Patricia and Namaste came over, they gave very generously to us. They supported and continue to support us, and then we made further connections with Brazil, and the rest is history. And then I focused very, very strongly on applying it to an Australian context, which is essentially is not a climate-related context, but an economic-related context. So instead of relying on cheap labour in developing countries, we need to make it work for everybody. We need to make it work for the staff. We need to make it work for the land. We need to make it work for the managers. We need to make it work for the market. So it's related to Western economics is where the challenge is that I'm moving through. And particularly in a social sense too, because it has to give back what we put in. Because I'm refusing to continually work through life by having to work external to land, off land, doing destructive jobs, working for unethical hamburger makers or something like that to put fuel in my car. When I'm going and putting my energy into the land, it's reciprocal now, and the land gives back while you give to it. And that's my goal.
Yeah, Scott, I think that really encompasses, even from the definitions around regenerative agriculture, it's just like putting back in is one of the really big themes. So maybe, Scott, if you could unpack for us, we've got a few farmers in our audience that probably are saying, well, I'm a sort of a conventional farmer that's just started in the regen space, and I'm not really understanding. If we can just to get into, like, if you were coming onto a property, what it is exactly that you would look on the landscape, and what do you do, and what would you recommend?
Well, I usually start my observation with about sort of 50 to 100 k's of the farm, and I start looking at what's growing on the roadsides that people can't get rid of. And then by the time I get to the farm, I've usually got quite a few plants cut off and put in the back of the car, ready to ask them what they are. And then that's usually where the beginning point starts. That's where the conversation begins. And then I work with the context of the farmer. What does the farmer want? That's the first thing, and that'll determine how you plant, what you plant, and the scale, etc. But usually, this system is based on species succession, and so what we're working with is successional plants. So we're working with really strong plants that are dominating in that successional point which the farm is in. So it doesn't matter if it's in early succession, secondary succession, late succession, or what. There is always a plant group, not just the species group, but a successional group of many different species that dominate. And they're the ones that are giving, and giving. They're full of power. You can't kill them. Ask the council. So we turn that power into our advantage. It's a little bit like judo. And suddenly it flips and it starts to work for us. And that's where I go back to where we see nature as chaotic, whereas it is in fact order. So we start to organise that order into an extremely powerful system where we start a positive feedback loop.
So with that example, Scott, okay, you're driving along a driveway, there's a series of weeds there along the driveway, you've identified what it is. So how then do you integrate that to work for you?
Well, that's part of the framework. So I'll just take, to answer that question as honestly as I can, I have to say that this the framework of syntropic agriculture is based on a set of principles, a set of elements that come together to form a dynamic. Mm-hmm. And that dynamic really must be understood because it's where it all locks in and the whole becomes more than the sum of parts. It's complexity management. So everything has to be learned at once. But to extract from that, to answer your question, I have to extract from that dynamic. I have to say that what I'm doing is I'm identifying plants that will come together into that dynamic and say, look, and then I'll represent the power by the power of those plants and then go on to explain how they work together. Mm. And there's a certain framework in that. Yep. And it's not rocket science. It's not at all. But it has to be unpacked and then looked at and to be put together as that dynamic has to be put together. And what I'm going to do, I've written a paper about, we call it a consortium. So what we'll do is we'll always start, it's got its jargon, its lingo. But I will put on my website a downloadable PDF document where I've outlined a consortium. It does ask more questions than it answers, but it opens up that type of thinking. So what I will do is I'll start to, but to go back again to your question, I understand that the farmer, the person on the land, knows their land better than just about everybody else. They innately know already the information that they need to do it. I just have to organise their understanding with that information. So what I will do is I'll say, okay, this plant does this when, what's this plant? And I'll ask them all about the plants. Then I'll explain to them there and then with examples which exist everywhere on what's going on through that framework. And then bang, the light bulb comes on. They don't take long to learn it. I can teach the full system generally within 8 hours. But I like to follow it up as well because it does ask more questions than it answers until the light bulb comes on. Mm. Yeah.
So how would you define the difference between regenerative agriculture and syntropic agriculture?
There's no difference. It is regenerative agriculture.
Yeah.
There's no exclusivity there.
Yeah. Well, it's really
Well, can I
interesting.
ask you-
Sorry, go on. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, we yeah, Scott, I'm really interested in the successional planning, the successional plants and how they work in an environment where we've had bushfires.
Yes.
So I think the big concern that we're seeing in the Australian landscape right now is that we're getting all of these new varieties that weren't around 200 years ago. And, you know, there's been so much change in how we actually sometimes the successional plants coming through, there are actually proscape in the past.
They are actually what? What was that last word? Sorry.
I think she's frozen.
Yes.
So they were inherent in the landscape in the past.
They weren't so...
Helen, turn your video off. We've lost you. This is Wallengra internet.
Inherent.
Oh, inherent. Okay.
So they were inherent in the landscape in the past, and it's all changed. How do we work with that in that environment?
Well, that's all. Look, yeah. Look, I was travelling a lot through that country with, just after the fires, particularly after the big rain that we got a couple of months after the fires. There was quite a lot of rain around the eastern side of the continent, and I saw. Look, when you start to understand, and I'm actually going to put together a video about I took a lot of photographs and made a lot of observations through the Syntropic prism, which is not a brand. It's actually how nature works, but it's a new insight. And through that insight, I'm going to make a video explaining all of my observations through with photos. But what I saw was that it's human management is the issue as to why the bushfires were so severe to begin with. And that's obviously not my speciality. It's a decision-making process that needs to be made by the public. It involves policy and all sorts of stuff. I can offer the other end of it, the ecological insights. That's what I can offer. But what essentially happened is we created a situation because by the way our culture manages, our Western culture manages country, that it became incredibly flammable. Then you throw a drought at that and look out. And that's what we saw. And we saw total destruction. And we saw also extremely good recovery in the eucalypt. I noted a lot of good recovery in the eucalypt. And you might know that we use a lot of eucalypt in Syntropy. We use its power. And that power to recover, we gain from that through what we call a growth pulse. So we work with these pulses of life that work through cycles. And that growth pulse was enormous in recovery with the eucalypt. It's exactly what the eucalypt needed, but not in such a severe way. But what happened was it burnt out most of the life. It was too hot, and it burned out most of the life throughout. I travelled a very long way up and down to Sydney and out to Orange, all through the back country, through Coolatai and Varel, everywhere. A lot of fires, particularly coming back in through the southern end of the New England ranges towards the coast. And the characteristics are all very similar. And the fire just killed everything except for pioneering plants. So what it did is it killed succession. So underneath of these plants is the new wave of life ready to come through. However that organises itself depends on the outside influences, but it killed everything off. So what we have is a full recovery, a eucalypt recovery. A lot of them died, but most of them recovered. Then we have pioneer species, like disaster taxa, which are coming back in to repair, which are very low succession. And what's happened is we're creating conditions again for the next bushfire. That's what's happening now. And why that happens is because just a little bit of jargon from Syntropy, which we call senescence. which is after a plant or a group of plants or a successional group have moved through their purpose in succession, they start to become senescent and they sit there and they wait for disturbance so a pulse can happen and a new wave of succession can move through. And that's the power we use to be farmers now. That's what powers it. It's very similar to what the Grazing for Profit people, the RCS, Brian Welberg, Holistic Managers, Glenn Chapman, it's just the woodland analogue to the same thing. So the senescence, just to help people in your audience understand this, the senescence, what happens is in a grassland ecology, which is it's a savanna ecology, which is different than a woodland ecology. They're not mutually exclusive, but they dominate two different parts of the planet. But in a savanna ecology, where we often graze cattle and where the insights through the whole Alan Savory's work, Grazing for Profit, etc., those people, where that comes from, the word that they use, the cattlemen, is the rank grass, okay? We understand once the grass has gone rank, it's grazier terminology. And this is just to familiarise people with these meanings, because what I really want to express is syntropic agriculture is the woodland equivalent of time-managed grazing, holistic managed, etc. They're almost exactly the same. It's time, space, dynamic, recovery, etc. Growth pulses. So what happens is when you've got grass that's gone rank, the cattle don't like it. It's become it's mostly carbon. It starts to oxidise. It sits there, and obviously in a holistic management or managed grazing, we're going to trample it back in with cattle, aren't we? Normally, that's what we normally do. So we'll mob cattle on it to fix that, and then we'll put that back to the earth. Normally in tree-based or forests, these cycles can last hundreds of years. It's a very short moment in time for nature. To us, it's totally different, but it's just a glimpse. It's a second, relative to the timescales that we talk about with the lives of trees and forests. And a storm will knock it down, or something will knock it down. There'll be pests, there'll be all kinds of influences, pathogenic fungi, etc., that will eventually bring that plant back to earth. So going back to the bushfires, the eucalypt have become senescent, and they stand there for a very long time, and then we have these management practices which inhibit succession. So we have these enormous hundreds and hundreds of thousands of square kilometres of senescent eucalypt throughout the country, and they're just waiting for a match, and up they go. That's the long and short of it there, but I will make a video explaining that, and I'll go into detail about that just to help with the insights. It's on how we may be able to prevent it in the future, because we're setting up for the next one now.
But I remember back in the drought and during the bushfires, and we did all this work on the studying of the different trees and the ability to protect the environment from the bushfires. Mm-hmm. And it was very controversial, but they talked about eucalypts have so much oil in them. Yeah. So they were the ones that actually created a massive bushfire environment, whereas some of the trees like the oaks and the deciduous trees were the ones that actually, because they've got such big, huge root systems, that actually seemed to be a protective buffer from the bushfires. Can you help? Yeah, let's talk about that, because I find that fascinating.
I'd love to do that. All right. So first, no tree is at fault. No tree has a particular characteristic that defines it. So what happens is you get particular characteristics through its life cycle. So if you have a set of characteristics generally about a plant, any organism, you, me, it's obviously often quite relative to age. So when you're a baby, you have many different characteristics to when you're old. And when you're in the peak of your life cycle, you've got a whole list of different characteristics, and they express dynamically in different ways. So we have to look at when in the life cycle we're looking at this plant. We have to say, okay, when that plant's very young, it might not be as flammable as when it's very old. But we also have to understand that plants grow together in what we call a consortium. Plants will organise themselves in natural ecology into consortia. But what we have to understand is too, the characteristics of that plant in a certain time in its life cycle with the other plants it's growing with. because it's not just one tree going, hey, I'm ready to burn. Yeah, sure it is. We've got eucalypts managed the way we have now. But in a healthy environment, eucalypts are among many, many species together. This is what happens. We can look at a whole eucalypt stand and go, there's no diversity here. But we have to ask ourselves why, and that has got a lot to do with how we manage it. And often these are unintended consequences that we don't understand. So we've got to it's a different thing to go into that. It's paradigm sort of stuff. But I'll give you a short story, because I was under threat from the bushfires too. And I had to make a fire plan. And I was looking at the country. I knew where the fire was going to come from. We all knew where it was going to come from. And I knew, without consciously thinking, where the fire was, how it was going to move down towards to threaten certain areas. And then I only afterwards, once I made the fire plan, did I realise why I knew where the fire would go. The fire was going to follow the senescent part of the forest. It was going to follow where the more dead timber was, where there was less diversity, where there was more potential for a crowning bushfire. And that was all, and I can't explain why that is a part of senescence in this podcast, but most welcome to in other situations, absolutely. I'm very happy to speak about it. But my farm was in amongst that, right? The syntropic block was there. And not in any single time, it's full of eucalypt, did I consider it to be part of the fire's path. I unconsciously, because I was thinking fire and safety, I unconsciously understood that part of the land was the fire break. It had more eucalypt in it than anywhere else. But it was because of the eucalypt, the amount of succulent, the amount of moisture in the ground, the amount of wet and damp biomass on the ground, the litter on the ground, the cooling effects of all of the transpiration, the water cycle within it, all of the green succulent life everywhere. I didn't even think, and then I went back and went, oh, geez, that's full of eucalypts, and that's my fire break. Now there's a story to tell one day. So, there's a lot of complexity in it. It's got a lot to do with the characteristics of plants at certain times in their life cycle and who and what they're growing with and the state of them together. But at the end of the day, there's plenty of examples of healthy, good, cool eucalypt forests that won't burn. And there's plenty of very dry, brittle type eucalypt forests that will burn. And it's not necessarily climate and rainfall related. I know that has a big influence, but there's never one single answer for anything. Never one single reason for anything. It's a combination. So we've got all this new stuff to share, we really do.
Yeah, that is so cool. Isn't it funny how these poor trees have been the baddies and it's almost like the analogy of the monoculture crop. But if you get that monoculture crop and you put it in with, 6 or 7 other multi-species within that, they become this incredible diverse environment that is actually creating this really amazing, putting carbon back in the soil. And so that is just, I find it so fascinating. Amazing.
That's what we're after. Yeah. That's what we're after. We're all after the same thing. We're all after that. And we call that, when we get that connection made between all of the plants in the consortium together into the forest, where the whole thing starts to beat as one single heartbeat is essentially what happens. And we cycle it and we work in those cycles. That's our management methodology. And that we call our term, the jargon in the syntropic terminology is, we call that the macro organism. It's one thing. It's one expression of life working in concert. And you become part of it too, because you're a conscious thing entering that. Your influence is then therefore makes you part of it too. So you are to a large extent responsible for decay and desertification or an increase in life.
Yeah, amazing that, I heard you talk about how when you did your bushfire plan and you just unconsciously knew that your place was going to be protected.
That's right.
And it's really amazing. I remember when Mike and I were working back about 15 years ago, and they had the locust plague back then. And we had been working on some crops using some biological management. And all of these locusts came in and basically didn't touch the crops that we were working with.
Yes.
But all the crops next door were wiped out.
Yes.
And that's because of and what I understood was that basically insects have antennas. And the purpose of insects is to take out the bad.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right. That's exactly. It fits in. It's a fundamental part of syntropy to that insight, and is foundational. You know, when we get that's an expression of senescence. It can be senescence can be triggered by many things. Stress is a big one, amongst other things. But when we see pests moving in, usually, can you still hear me? I go.
Yeah.
And that's usually succession moving forward, saying, okay, thanks for everything. Mutual cooperation, unconditional love. You gave, now goodbye. And we rarely get pest attacks. When we do, it's a sign something's got to go. And it's not how do we maintain that? It's how do we exit that and continually move up. That's dead right, though. That's exactly what happens. And when we get these synergetic effects, which can be influenced by outside forces, large old trees that have a radius of influence equal to its height can influence systems, and you can get a senescent effect. And we've had strong browsing pressure on those plants with wallabies, etc., where nothing touches anything else. But you can tell where the attacks happen and why. And so if you've got, instead of being defensive and reactive and starting to fence off things, increase its health, and you'll actually find that the whole system stabilises and nothing's really going to hurt it. Yes, so I agree completely, Helen. This is what is a common theme through all of our insights into agroecology, yeah.
Yeah, I think that the scientist was Dr. David Callahan.
Right.
Have you heard of any of his? Yeah. So Dr. David Callahan did all of these studies on insects and found, and actually like it's scientifically shown that basically plants that are out of balance, the purpose of these insects is to take out the plants that are out of balance.
Yes, it's a very important function. Yes. I don't need, I mean, the science I'm sure is correct, but I've seen it in action. It's definitely, for me to succeed, I need to understand and manage that, for me to continually increase life, increase the quality of everything around me. And it's definitely, from my experience, empirical experience, that's definitely the case. Confirmed.
Yeah. So Scott, can I ask you, just coming back to the farm? Sorry, Kel, I'll keep on. I'm just keep on
go for it.
In because I'm listening. So basically, if you've got a farm that basically needs, I've heard, and you correct me if I'm wrong, that basically if you really want to get our landscape moving, we need at least 30% of our farmland to have trees on it, tree cover, to actually get to profitability, to the point of profitability. Anything less than that, we're actually not, they've apparently done studies on that. And when you go in there and put the plan in of planting trees in an agroforestry context,
yes.
Let's talk about that, because I'm finding that's really interesting.
Well, that's the next step for us all. What I see is once we have a critical mass of understanding of how syntropic agriculture actually works, because we've got perception issues, as with every type of new kind of system and form that comes in, there's always perception issues. Right now, we're at the very front end of the early adopters picking it up, and we're going to move through as that disperses through. It's going to we'll hit a critical mass where the curve picks right up and more people understand it. And that's when we're really going to get some outcomes on the land. So, yes, we do need those trees, but it's not a case of just going out and planting trees, because what we're doing is we're setting up for senescence. We're setting up for a stop or a stall in succession, and we call that a successional gap or something like that. Then you get all of the trees, like you see the trees down the fence lines, or the trees down the roadsides coming into the properties that there's no grass under them. They're looking poor. Everyone says those trees are no good for anything. It's a management thing. And if we start to use trees on land with this successional framework, particularly the way it splices in with managed grazing and holistic grazing, which land must be managed that way. And if we're going to crop, we've got to figure out a way of pasture cropping through that, which we are developing too. In Syntropic, in Brazil as well, we're developing the pasture cropping methods, which are a little bit of a segue I won't go into. But they all come together as one in the end. So your grassland management, your grazing plan will quite often fit perfectly in with your pruning cycles on your trees, the influence of animals on your trees. And once that happens, yes, the whole will become more than the sum of the parts. It will go to a whole new level. So managed grazing and syntropic agriculture have to get married.
I love that.
I'll make a meme about that. Make a note about that.
Okay.
So can I just ask about the pruning?
Like a good relationship, it must be supported. There must be consciousness within that of the dynamic. Otherwise, the relationship may not work. And this is the marriage, how we must support that marriage is with conscious management, be highly mindful towards the needs of the elements within it. Please, sorry, pardon me, continue.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Scott. I'd like to know, in a relationship, sometimes there's more a feminine aspect and a masculine aspect.
Yes.
Is that something that you see in the work that you do from the perspective of the nature and the environment?
Yes, I definitely see a strong feminine and masculine polarity, yes.
Where do you see that? How do you see that?
Well, I actually got these insights through my understanding of Tantra, actually, but what I understand is, particularly in the early days, you have the complementary feminine and masculine role. Obviously, I'm not speaking about gender. So what I see, and this is funny because a lot of it comes, it's naturally in the consciousness of humanity, because as it came across from Brazil in the Portuguese language, there's a lot of different ways they name things. And when we translate them, they sort of reveal themselves. So, okay, some of the complementary nature of the masculine and feminine within that, and these are our insights, of course these are archetypes, is the eucalyptus and the banana, the two that we see that quintessentially sort of define the visuals of syntropic agriculture in a subtropical or tropical climate. Of course, in other climates, there's analogues to that. It's not exclusive. But we see that as it comes across from the Portuguese language to help explain and help the people in that culture understand what they do, they call the eucalypt the king and they call the banana the queen. And together they're strong. Without each other, nothing else without them thrives as much. So these are two strong plants in a particular part of species succession, which is around about the end of what we call placenta to early secondary succession, is where these plants are very influential in the success or the quality of life, let's say, and the quantity of life. So the eucalypt is the king and the banana is the queen. And I've made these observations through my understanding of the archetypes of Tantra. And I see that the masculine is definitely in the eucalypt. It moves up to the top in the sense that it'll take the brunt of the sun. So what it will do, it will selflessly put shade down, and through giving and creating the right amount of shade for more and more life below it, it will thrive in its selflessness, in the sense that, like, you know, that type of masculine quality that defines the masculine, not men necessarily, of course, but and it will be cut, and it will be cut relentlessly, and give, and it will thrive. It will come back stronger and stronger and stronger. And then you have the queen, which is the banana, and the banana that she will create space, and below her she will regulate a whole heap of functions that of all of these levels of life that depend upon her. And she will create the situation where you've got the cooling, the moisture, and you have its daughters, you have its aunts. This is all language from Portuguese, and this is all very observable. So you have this very, I don't know how to describe this out of being essentially in a sort of a sensual type of way, but a very succulent piece of living life, which is brimming with quality. In a situation where you step out of the agroforestry and it's hush. So what you get is this harmony that develops between them, and that's that masculine feminine thing, and of course that works right through into the dynamic of the managers and the humans involved, and I see some sort of harmony and commonality between that yin and yang balance and polarity that seems to go through the universe. I don't know, that's just my interpretation, and I see it in the community. I see it in the people that come to learn from me. There's a strong masculine feminine type of thing where I'm seeing particularly really important things, and this is what I give back to Regen Ag, that it's really balanced the genders or sex, the masculine and feminine, because as things move back into balance with land and countries, in order to maintain that balance or to increase that process, the social side of it needs to go back into balance as well. And I'm finding that from my personal observations, when the rubber hits the road, with the people that come to me from land that are really willing to step out of the comfort zone and take the plunge and really go for it and really move into that real risk-taking but early adopter phase, women around about 35 upwards are the ones who are saying, okay, they're with their man out on the farm or whatever. Old mate's used to doing what he does his way, whatever. He's willing to have a go here and there. But it's the woman that gets in touch with me and says, what can we do here? What have you got that you could offer us? How could that work here? And they're the one listening. They're the one learning. They're the one going, holy hell, I can see how that can work here. They're who I'm engaging with mostly when the rubber hits the road, when the action happens. That's what I'm seeing. And I'm really thankful about that, because that is something that I grew up lacking in my childhood on the land, was the role of the feminine, which was very important to balance my quality of life as a child. So I'm really, really happy about that. And I can see how that's improving the landscape.
Such a good conversation. I'm fascinated. So Scott, we actually transitioned Carbon8 to a Syntropic enterprise structure about 6 months ago. And so we did some work with Christine, and we started to really get into what Syntropic meant as our social impact organization. Yep. And it's so musical to me to hear it like now through the agricultural presentation. So like I'd ask you, like, what if Syntropic agriculture was adopted by farming and agriculture across Australia? What would we be looking at? What would our nation look like? What would our environment look like?
That's a great question. I'm really, really very pleased to answer that. And I've got a lot of things I can draw upon for that. What we're going to essentially see is an increase in community. We're going to see an increase in population in the bush, an increase in productivity, an increase in enterprise, an increase in local business, small business, more artisan type business. That's what we're going to see. We're going to see an increase in housing security. We're going to see the diminishing of the rural poor. This is what's going to happen. And I've confirmed this multiple times, because from my own experience where I grew up pretty lonely, because, there's not many people out on the land, and there's not many kids to play with when you're right out in the bush, And but I used to find signs of the culture that was previous to the Western culture that moved in and displace them. I used to find signs of women, children, domestic life in the bush with grinding stones and stuff, you know, and things that people would prepare, humans would prepare. I saw community. I saw the presence of community. Then I also saw the presence of community in old dairies, old meat houses, old processing things like homestead sort of stuff. I saw old huts. I saw that were abandoned. I saw old signs where there was much more activity. There was much more, there were families, many families. My grandfather built a school on the farm. You know, these things happened, and this has just gone backwards. And of course, my context is I had to leave to find better prospects. It's just entropic. What's been going on in the bush, the opposite of syntropy. It's been entropic, the whole process. And then as I've gone into a conversation with people where I've presented the challenges of syntropic agriculture being implemented in the Australian bush, I've spoken to many generations of people. I've had the conversation with 3 generations of people in the one conversation, and I can turn around and ask those older people, and I can say, I'll bet you any money that there are 3 times as many, at least 3 times as many people in this piece of land farm that we're standing on now. Wasn't there when you were a kid? Yes, there was. And I could say, yes, well, I can see, because I can see right there that we're standing right next to an old milk cellar, which would obviously only supply very few people in that immediate community. So I said, so what's going to happen is with that site that's going to move back out. We're going to move out of entropy now and back into syntropy, back into complexity. And what we're going to need is people, jobs. The implications of the abundance that is an outcome of this requires community. It's a regenerative. It's actually regenerative. So I said, you know, what's going to happen when you put in tree lines for those cows? You're going to put in all sorts of stuff. Okay, you can put in seed stock for root stock or whatever you like. It doesn't matter. I can't get into the technical side of syntropy right now, but you will end up with so many species there that are of service to your cows and your land that you can graft onto later on for a pear crop, an apricot crop, an almond crop. Because you might want to do that, because when we start running the numbers, there's more profitability there. You're moving up into abundance. It's cost you nothing to get there. You've gone through species succession to get to a pear crop from what once was a barren wheat field or something like that. So you're going to run into new problems. You're going to need pickers. You're going to need people that are going to be able to prune and manage. You're going to need 10 times as many people here. You're going to need a community. Everyone was really happy to hear that, but we're going to face this challenge together. But that's the outcome of syntropy in the Australian bush, is total regeneration, community. We might be able to actually have a dance together in the bush again.
I love that.
I love that too.
I love that.
Absolutely.
It's so good.
I might meet a wife out there. My son might actually find a wife in the bush again.
Yeah.
What's the number, Scott? For all those women out there?
Sorry, I'm not looking for a wife. It was theoretical.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's so true. Like, we're like literally living this really complex emotional reality right now. There are so many complexities happening all around us, with so many new pressure points and emotional pressure points and change that are happening and affecting the whole globe, which is very unique time in human history. And like looking at how regenerative agriculture has sort of like become sort of like this pathway forward over. So when we started this, it was such an unknown word, you know, it was such a little unknown word with no context at all, very little, dusty old books in the library context. And you had to be quite a diehard to get there, you know, like you really had to be a truth-seeking farmer to get to that end result. But now, you know, it's really like, it's basically mainstream as far as it's going to go. So I can see how regenerative agriculture is going to evolve to syntropic agriculture. It definitely feels like the more complex, higher form of, it feels more matured. That's what it feels like. It feels like it is the matured wisdom of regenerative agriculture. And I feel like humanity's consciousness is able to deal with its complexities now. And I'm very excited to start to see and understand syntropic agriculture grow through. It's almost a succession of regenerative agriculture.
Yeah, look, it is. It's also it's not just the ends, but it's the means to the ends as well, because it works in every successional. There's power in every successional stage. So in the low succession, we've got a lot of power, and this is one thing that I'm really starting to work with people with, is that what's in our head. As Darren Doherty says, the paddock between the ears. This is really important paddock to work in. We're always looking at the trees at the end. Always, when we get there. Hey, whoa, slow up, come back to the present, be here and now and look around you. You're looking at power. You're looking at successional power that will get you from where you are to those trees. Yeah. But get in with this power here and get the abundance out of that. And that's what actually I'm starting to demonstrate on my new farm now, is how to start off with that and make the most of the present, because you can work with the here and now. And there's been obviously some misperceptions about the potential of profitability within syntropic agriculture, but it's not syntropic agriculture's fault. It's the manager. It's up to the person who's doing it, whether it's profitable or not. And of course, it's essentially, at the end of the day, it requires a farmer if you want to be a farmer and you want to be profitable with it, you actually have to be a farmer. You can't just rock up and get syntropic agriculture out of the box and poke it with a stick and say, okay, go, let's go. Come on, what are you going to do? No. It's your responsibility to do that. And 80% of it comes down to your skill as a farmer and a strategist and how to work with that. And that's where I really move in to try to help people out, because it's like, I have got a farming background and I have got a lot of experience with syntropic agriculture. Let's move into strategy and context. Let's see how we can work in the present. Let's see how we can make, like we say, in these early successional times that we work in now, which we call the placenta. Let's see how we can make the placenta work. Let's see how you can get your income and cash flow now while you're moving towards abundance. Experience abundance while moving into further abundance is my goal.
I love that. That is such a profitability, and the talk of profitability is and it's such an evolving consciousness when it comes through this succession, if you like from where we were talking about profitability 10 years ago on the farm to this conversation now, and what it actually, the framework that the container that holds the notion of abundance now, it's so different. Like if we're looking at syntropic, we're part of that profitability is legacy, is like, what legacy are you going to leave? And that is a whole other conversation about abundance. And
Well, let's do it. Let's make that legacy. Let's make sure that it turns out much better than when we got there. Mm-hmm. And also I say that we don't rob Peter to pay Paul. We don't take from other waste streams. We stop using outside inputs to start to generate our profitability. Let's stop it. Let's generate through ecological function the abundance on in situ, and stop relying on industrial systems like waste streams, but compost and things like that. Sure, it's good, helps you out at the start. You might need it, but if you can't start depending on it, you're robbing Peter to pay Paul, I think. I'd like to see these economies to be generated on the land.
Yeah, I think that what's really the new emerging regenerative agriculture audience right now, and it's not new, it's all our young farmers who actually, they just jump right in there and they're instantly, it's like an instant shake and mix regenerative ag farmer.
Not going to happen.
Yeah, add some water.
Not going to happen. No out of the box. No, there's no out of the box.
Sorry, I don't mean just someone. I think it's those farmers who actually haven't had so they haven't owned the land, but they've been wanting, it's like in their DNA to want to be able to farm. So we've been working with Young Farmers Connect, and there's they've got 5,000 young farmers that are just, they've been working, it's been in their blood, but they haven't actually physically been able to find their own land.
Look, I see that a lot too. I see a lot of those people talking to me too, and I really, 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 really want to help them. And I want them to, I was very lucky in the sense that I grew up farming. So I saw, farming, it's a state of mind rather than a trade. It's a trade too, but it's actually a state of being. And it's a way that we address problems and how problems present themselves to it, and what we do in face of those problems. How creative are we in very hard times? How do we see something as a resource which could be always seen as a problem? There's these things, So I grew up, stick picking when a truck was broken down. By the time I was 10, I was able to fix it most of the time. I was driving tractors before I drove a car. You know, I was welding and hard facing harrow points for cash, you know, for my income on my school holidays. How can I get these experiences? I knew how to solve problems. I never felt overwhelmed by enormous challenges. That's, I think, a big part of farming is when those huge, yes, you can feel overwhelmed. You're allowed to feel overwhelmed. But at the same time, what makes you a farmer is your ability to rise to that and turn it around. That's what really a farmer is about, I think. I want how can I teach that to people? How can I share what I learned, which when those challenges, those young people that you're talking about, when they're presented with those challenges, how can they rise to strength in those really hard times that are going to get them somewhere, especially at startup? You know, how can I give them that? How can that be shared where they rise to strength? That's a question that is mostly rhetorical, but you know, this is, I think, the big challenge. We've got to download that. We've got to share. We've got to find a way to give these people that spirit, you know, and they can get it. I believe in them. I do think it's possible, but I'm very open to finding out how I can share that, how I can connect with other people who know about that and can share that and give them that, because that's what they need. Because I don't want to see them getting beat down, you know. I don't want to see anyone getting beat down. And, you know, if you're going to get beat down as a farmer, it's going to happen. And your ability for you to bounce back is going to determine your success.
I've got a really cool idea, Scott.
Yeah.
I would love to get some of our Young Farmer Connect group onto a podcast with you.
Yeah.
Just have like a Q&A of young farmers
I'd love that.
That would be so cool.
Well, let's run it through NRAD Summit, Helen. Let's do a whole section at the summit on it.
Yeah,
I agree with you. Like the young farmers, they haven't. It's so interesting because obviously with Carbon8, we were fundamentally transitioning the older generation farmer to Regeneration. Well, we didn't mean to do that, but that just sort of naturally was what happened. It was all about supporting them to learn it and get it and have that light bulb moment and transition and support them through that process. But then we've sort of like met so many younger farmers who don't need that transitional process. Like they don't need that that support. They're already there. They're kind of born already ready to be regenerative farmers, you know. And they're very driven by sort of their feelings about the environment and the planet and our future and that energetic, which is that sort of like push for them. But I agree with you. They haven't messed up enough. They haven't like broken enough. They haven't, their bodies aren't scarred and battle worn by their own experiences, which has not given them the armor. But I have a feeling like that the planet right now and the natural like resonance of where we're heading is probably going to provide enough of those unique challenges that we can't even imagine right now. It feels like stuff's coming our way that's going to be very unique. This timeline.
When you feel that you've been broken and you can't give any more, we have to understand that's just the beginning.
Yeah.
That's what the courage, that's the amount of power and courage we need. It's necessary. And, to form together as one, as a common group of people with our hearts connected and with those full intentions, that power can be shared through just that energetic exchange, I believe.
Well, to me, I would mark that powerfully with this higher form of consciousness as the word sovereignty. So I would mark that now as that battle that's going on in so many ways right now across the planet and will show itself in so many ways into our very near future. And actually standing in your sovereignty is an extremely meaningful and you can't fake that shit, you know, like you gotta live it. You can't, it's not something that you can just read about. Like it's an owned experience. It's an owned wisdom. And I really think that word sovereignty is going to become a fundamental part of our young farmers.
And Scott, I'm just really resonating with how you said that sometimes those battle scars are actually the fabric of what you become. Because when I remember when we went through the drought every day, looking at this brittle brown environment and feeling just like it was like one day after another, and not having any capacity to know what was on the landscape. And then to watch to watch the rain and the green come, and to now even marvel at it even now after, you know, a year later. That is the essence of like having had that armor of really loving the land, like really seeing the land through its brittleness to really come to the real connection of the land. And oh my God, I just have such a strong connection now for the land that I never had before the drought, you know?
That sounds just beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, adaptation, Helen, because from that sovereignty of survival and doing it with a light heart, I mean, that's basically how do you survive well? You've got to have a lightness of being, like Carbon8 was born. So a lot evolved for us standing in that sovereignty. I mean, that was a sovereign act, right? So, and that if you apply that to agriculture, exactly the same situation. There's when you stand in your sovereignty, you take action in some direction that can be quite surprising and can actually like change the future of 10 generations coming after you, you know, like.
So, Scott, I think it's time for us to say goodbye, but what an amazing conversation. And if anybody wants to get in touch with you, tell us about your email. What we'll do is we'll put your website on the video and we'll do a bit of a plug for you. And so what's your email?
Well, you can just contact me through the website.
Yep.
You know, I've got I've just started just finished beta testing a community-based learning platform of Syntropic Agriculture that I've put together. I've been trying to find the best ways to share the knowledge, and there's certain important parts of it need to be learned in a special way together as one, so you understand the dynamic. And then the more accumulative-based bit-by-bit learning is how you incorporate and understand and learn advanced practices. So I've packaged that, and I've put that together as what I call the pathway to regeneration. I call it our journey. That's what I've called it, because we're all on it together, and we learn as a group, and that's what I've done. So I've felt that that's the best way for people to learn, and so I've got just a small group of people learning together in that now. We're up to 50 members, and I'm really happy to be part of it and share. And the feedback I've got so far is that yes, the understanding of the dynamic is getting through, and it's them aha moments then. That's what I'm after. And then support and group learning through that and after it is part of it. So that's available through my website. That's called Our Journey, a pathway to regeneration, where we walk together. It's just the way I feel that we've got to go about it. And, you know, it's pretty cheap. It's $9 a week. You know, it's US now. It's gone up from Australian to US because the website can only take US. I see it as the price of a couple of beers a week, you know, and, you know, maybe just back off on the beers or whatever it is that you don't do that's good for you, or do that's not good for you, I mean, and perhaps invest in that and learn together, and then we get that community going on and see what goes from there, just see what happens from there. But the quality information needs to get into people in an organised way, apart from the field stuff, because with all of the problems with travel, with the COVID issues and whatnot, it's just become a real problem to be able to get around and share and learn. But what I've noticed is with this online, I've embedded an online course in the group as well. And what I've learned is people learn more in the online form. That's what I've found now, because sometimes a 2 to 3 day Syntropic Agriculture workshop, it can fly over the heads of a lot of people pretty quickly. And I've only noticed personally about a 20% uptake in the real true understanding of it. And everyone else gets left behind. We've all packed up and gone home and it's all over. And my learning was galvanised through discussion and group learning after that. And so people can go back through that course as much as they can, because it's all just there as information. And what's happened is we've started to get members from around the world come along. And this has been the new one that I've been really, really, really frustrated at, how these people around the world can get access to the knowledge. And now they can, because it's online, you know. So we've got members from Tbilisi in Georgia, you know, Iran, you know, and these are fair income people, you know, that are coming, you know, Asia, Africa, you know, and it's like, oh, great, this is where it needs to go. So Yeah, I'd like to co-develop with anybody who's interested in reaching out and empowering others online too.
Well, Carbon8 would love to support you in any way that we can, definitely. And I'm going to get you to come and visit our farm, because I think that the all of the work that we've done and what the wisdom that you have, I think could just and just take some videos and you like a hands-on. It'd be awesome. Love that. Yeah.
Oh, I'm going to share something. I've got something. I'm going up to far north Queensland, out into the far northwestern dry tropics, to a cattle station out there. Desi Bolton, to his station out there, and I'm going to give him a hand up there with his tree rows. He's built some very long structures for tree rows, and I'm going to show a demo. I'm going to make a video to share about how you can start playing on your cattle station, wherever you are, or your sheep station, or your grazing enterprise. I'm going to show a demo. I'm going to do a video demo, which is a real sort of a nice little insight into how Syntropy works. So I'll video it and I'll upload that to YouTube and share it on social media so people can get a bit of a look at how they can start playing around a bit, in the paddock.
Excellent. And I would love also, if you need any support, Carbon8 now has we call it the What If department. And in that What If department, we have writers and artists. And if your work would like to some support from artists to get some posters, memes, education, anything made available, we're like totally offering.
Really into that. Totally into that. Now, I just would quickly segue across to, we've got this patented invention to cover the soil, right? We've got this thing and we've actually had it patented. It's bizarre because it took a dumb farmer like me and a couple other people to work it out, when there's millions and millions of money on technology spent on keeping soil bare. So we took the piss, and we've got the name's called the Multitron 3000, right? Highly technical, We just couldn't help it. And, if it takes a couple of blokes in the paddock with sticks to work it out, and suddenly it becomes worth patenting, it's got to have a name up to the classy. So it's called the Multitron 3000, and it's surfing towards the year 3000 on a wave of biomass. It's full of piss, take, and cheese, but the whole thing is because we have to mock ourselves if we're going this far with so much money spent and energy spent, we haven't bothered covering the soil. So, but yes, I'm part of my background is graphic design and arts, and I'm open 100% into integrating art into Regen Ag.
That's our whole thing.
Yeah, so I'm getting a friend to record a song and write a song for the background music in the promotional videos, and I'm really open to artists coming in. The whole we're going for a cult approach towards covering the soil. You know what I mean? So yeah, totally aligned. So yeah, we can throw that into the fray. And I was going to I got told naughty by marketing people not to do this, but I was going to be completely off the wall and just be anti-logo, because I did a lot of graphic design, and I was going to come up with an anti-logo where I just put it out every 3 months for an art competition to design the logo. And just as everyone gets familiar with the logo for the Multitron, it gets destroyed and a new one comes, just so everyone can have a go at making a logo. And I would think that would create brand recognition rather than consistency.
Sure. Anyway. You're very, very in alignment with what we're doing with the art department. I mean, we did a lot of research on it and realized that part of the issue with the lack of nutrition in our food and the lack of biodiversity in our vocabulary is the shrinkage of our imagination, which is in our hippocampus, which is literally our creative faculties for problem solving. So we were like, we can't stand here as a social impact organization all talking about regenerative agriculture and not address the actual lack of imagination and creative renaissance going on in our own human brain, because we are the imaginers of all of this. And so we are right in alignment, and I think that's just very, very this is the relationship that seems to form around the word syntropic. Like, you get these really very neatly aligned, high frequency, legacy thinking, beautiful relationships. And yeah, like we'd be very honored to work with you more, Scott.
We've got to connect. Definitely got to connect. Yeah. Let's make it happen. Yeah. Always into the syntropic theme at any way. If we can increase the quality and quantity of life within community and country, then I'm there every time.
Excellent.
It's been such a pleasure to meet you and get to know you and share your journey and what you're doing. Just amazing, wonderful. And let's connect again, and we'll get our group of farmers together and have a yarn.
Yeah, let's keep moving forward in all ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
Scott, is there anything you'd like to say to our listeners? Any last profound comment? Not to put you on the spot.
Yeah, no, just everybody, just thanks for being, part of this whole group of macroorganisms. Thanks for being interested as with myself and everyone else involved, and yourselves. Thank you for being. Thanks. Just really thanks. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, everyone, you guys have an excellent week ahead of you, and it's, as always, a pleasure to broadcast some of the most cutting-edge, leading thinkers within our beautiful regenerative space. So thank you, Scott Hall. It's been an absolute pleasure. And Miss McKosker, of course. And we will see you guys all very, very soon. Have the best day ever.
Oh, thank you. Goodbye, everybody. Bye.